No. You're entirely missing the point, mate. Imagine you're sitting there, right? It is 1923. You have absolutely no tech, no CGI. There are barely reliable light bulbs in half the buildings you walk into, and some absolute madman decides to film a train. The film is The Wheel. And he doesn't just point a camera at it. He uses this specific trick, these rapid fire cuts. He physically cuts the celluloid into smaller and smaller strips.
Right, but it's a parlor trick. It's a rhythmic editing gimmick. That's literally all it is.
Wait, hold on a second. A gimmick, it shouldn't work. But think about the actual mechanism of what he's doing to the viewer. He cuts down to 10 frames, then 5 frames, then 2 frames per shot. He is literally hacking the optic nerve.
Oh, hacking the optic nerve. Listen to yourself.
He is. By flashing those images faster than the conscious brain can process, he's triggering a physiological response. He is forcing your actual physical heart rate to mimic the rhythm of a steam engine accelerating. That is properly genius. That is a revolution in human perception happening in real time on a screen with nothing but scissors and glue.
Are you joking? Hacking the optic nerve. You're making it sound like the bloke invented neurosurgery. It was a warm-up exercise. You're getting utterly hysterical over a rhythmic cutting technique from 1923. There was nothing more than a mechanical exercise. It's a director trying to figure out how to keep an audience from falling asleep in a dark room. The technical footnote.
A footnote. It is the absolute spark. Because you have to understand, you sitting there listening to this right now on your phone or in your car, you watch these massive modern spectacles and you think it all started with computers rendering pixels. It didn't. It started with these absolute lunatics in the 1920s realizing they could manipulate the human nervous system. And that brings us to the actual mission today. Because to understand where modern cinema comes from, we are pulling a massive, heavy text right off the table.
Cinema, the magic vehicle, a comprehensive guide. Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
Which, to be fair, is a brilliant book, I'll grant you that.
It is the definitive map. And using this book, we are going to unpack the absolute peak of human artistic ambition. Fritz Lang's 1927 behemoth Metropolis. I am telling you, if you understand the sheer scale of what they attempted with Metropolis, it will completely change how you view every single modern blockbuster you ever watch. It is the definitive blueprint.
It is a lesson in arrogant overreach. That's what it is. You read the exact same book I did. It is a cautionary tale of a director whose ego was so monumentally out of control that he practically sank the entire German film industry just to build some oversized toys. You're talking about peak ambition. I'm talking about a bloody shambles of a production.
Hear me out. Take a sip of your pint and hear me out, because we need to properly set the stage for the listener. We are moving from the little technical sparks of 1923, like The Wheel, straight into the sheer, unadulterated, megalomaniac ambition of the German film industry trying to crush Hollywood. Look at the context. Universum Film, UFA, the biggest studio in Europe. They weren't just trying to make a nice little drama to play in Berlin. Fritz Lang, backed by his producer Erich Palmer, outlines this grand trilogy plan. The past, the present, and the future of Germany.
It's delusions of grandeur, mate. Pure and simple.
It's vision. You've got Nibelungen for the mythical past, Dr. Mabuse the gambler for the corrupt, hyperinflation-ridden present, and then the crowning jewel, Metropolis for the distant future. That's scope. For a single director to conceptualize and physically build the entire temporal identity of a nation, it is spot on. It is unmatched even today. Nobody pitches a studio on the past, present, and future of an entire culture and actually gets to make it.
That's rubbish, mate. Unmatched. It's unmatched because it's a totally unhinged business model. Look at the actual economics of what you're praising here. They pushed themselves to the absolute brink of bankruptcy. The production costs from Metropolis were astronomical. You're talking about millions of Reichsmarks during a period where the German economy was, frankly, incredibly fragile. They were building a 21st century city by hand. In 1927, do you understand the sheer financial idiocy of that? UFA practically immolated itself on the altar of Fritz Lang's ego.
But they had to. This is what you're not getting about the mindset of the 1920s. Think of UFA like a reckless modern tech startup today. You know the ones, the Silicon Valley darlings that burn billions in venture capital to build a single prototype. Why do they do it? Why do they run at a massive loss for years?
Because they're run by charlatans.
Because the prototype proves a new reality. They had to build the future to show it was possible. They were trying to break Hollywood's monopoly, and you don't do that by playing it safe with the balanced spreadsheet. You do it by building something so undeniably massive that the entire world has to stop and look. They had to do it even if it ruined them.
Oh, brilliant analogy. So UFA is a tech startup. Let's really pull that thread, shall we? Let's look at their brilliant business strategy. They set out to create the ultimate German nationalist triumph, a picture to absolutely trump the Hollywood superproductions in scale, scope, and technology. They wanted to prove European dominance. And how does this deeply German nationalist project survive, ultimately? How do they keep the lights on when Lang demands yet another 100-foot plaster skyscraper? It only survived because of American investment.
Well, that's just the reality of global finance.
The irony is staggering. It is a complete humiliation. They wanted to crush Hollywood, and they ended up begging American investors to bail them out because Lang couldn't stop building gigantic miniature cities. They were literally mortgaging their national pride to the very people they were trying to defeat. That is the definition of a shambles.
You're faffing about with the accountants. I'm talking about the art. Look at what they achieved specifically because of the limitations of the era. You see a lack of technology, a lack of digital effects. As a prison, I see it as a playground. The limitations of the 1920s birthed the greatest creativity in cinema history. Think about the mechanics of it. Today, if you give a director a computer, he gets lazy. He tells a visual effects house to make a city and goes to lunch. But in 1927, if you tell a director he has to create a futuristic megalopolis with wood, paint, plaster, and mirrors, he has to become a god of engineering. He has to invent entirely new ways of tricking the human eye.
He didn't become a god. He became a dictator of a gigantic but fundamentally broken execution. You keep raving about the ambition in the mirrors, but let's look at what that astronomical budget actually bought them. Because they spent all that money on the visual scaffolding, and they built it around a script by Thea von Harbu, who was adapting her own novel, by the way, that is completely, undeniably unhinged.
Unhinged? Are you mad? It is an archetypal masterpiece. It's modern mythology.
It is a logically absurd melodrama. Let's just look at the actual plot mechanics, purely as a narrative exercise for you listening right now. Let's see if this sounds like genius to you. You have the 21st century city, Metropolis. Up above, you have the elite, living in this decadent opulence, running around in pleasure gardens wearing silk. Down below, deep underground, you have the workers, the slaves, toiling in miserable clockwork conditions to keep the machines running.
The ultimate visual representation of class struggle, the spatial geometry of capitalism, spot on.
9. Visually, maybe. I'll grant you the spatial geometry is striking. But then we introduce the players. Joff Fredersen, the absolute ruler of Metropolis, the CEO of the future. His son Freder, who is just frolicking about in the gardens until he accidentally discovers the horrors of the underground. And then you have Maria, the slave woman who preaches love and peace to the workers down in the catacombs. So far, so simple. A bit heavy-handed, but simple. But then let's look at the actual gears of the plot, because this is where your genius blueprint completely falls apart into absolute nonsense.
It doesn't fall apart, it deepens.
Let me finish. Joff Fredersen, the supposedly brilliant, calculating ruler of this massive corporate state, is displeased. He doesn't like that his son is flirting with Maria, and he's worried about the workers organizing a strike. So what does a rational CEO do? Does he arrest Maria? Does he maybe improve working conditions slightly to appease the masses? No. He goes to Rotwang, this deranged inventor character who lives in a bizarre old house in the middle of a futuristic city, and commissions him to create a robot replica of Maria.
A brilliant narrative device, the false prophet.
It's a tactical disaster. Let's unpack the logic. Fredersen wants the robot Maria to go down into the catacombs, spread trouble among the workers, incite a violent revolt, and destroy the machines.
Exactly.
Purely so, Fredersen has an excuse to violently suppress the workers and bolster his own authority. Are you joking? What kind of needlessly convoluted, dodgy villain logic is that? I want to prevent a rebellion that might damage my factory, so I will build a multi-million-dollar robot to guarantee a rebellion that will absolutely destroy my factory, just so I can crush the rebellion that I started. It's mental.
Wait, hold on. You are completely ignoring the most important layer of that entire subplot. You are looking at Fredersen's political motivations through a purely logical corporate lens and calling them dodgy. But you are completely ignoring Rotwang's secret agenda. This is what elevates the script. It's not just a dry political thriller, it's a Greek tragedy.
Oh, here we go. Greek tragedy. Next you'll tell me it's Shakespeare.
It operates on that level of pure emotion. Yes. Listen to the source. Rotwang isn't just building this robot for a paycheck. He's not a contractor. Fredersen and Rotwang have massive history. Decades ago, Fredersen stole Rotwang's true love, a woman named Hel. Hel died giving birth to Fredersen's son, Freder. Do you see the mechanism here? Rotwang doesn't give a toss about Fredersen's political problems with the workers. Rotwang's robot isn't a political tool, it's a weapon of pure heartbreak and revenge. He designs the female robot to look like Maria, yes, but he programs it to take his revenge on the man who stole his life.
So the fate of an entire futuristic society, the lives of thousands of workers, all hinges on a jealous ex-boyfriend building a magic robot. That's your defense. That makes it a massive mythological heartbeat. It makes it a soap opera set in a factory. It's logically bankrupt.
It makes it human.
Right.
Listen to me, you. Put yourself in Rotwang's shoes right now. Imagine your absolute bitter rival steals the love of your life. She dies. Your rival then builds an entire glittering futuristic city on her metaphorical grave. He rules the world. He has everything. And then he has the audacity to come down to your little archaic laboratory and knock on your door and ask you to build a machine to help him control that very city. You'd burn it down too, wouldn't you? You'd build that robot, you'd smile at him, and you'd program it to destroy his empire, his city, and his son. It is a masterpiece of emotional stakes. It explains exactly why the robot incites absolute chaos.
It is emotionally overcooked. The entire underground floods because of this ridiculous scheme. The slaves, whose children are the very first victims of the revolt, end up going mad and burning the robot Maria at the stake. It's mass hysteria. And then we get to the climax. The big fight on the cathedral roof between Rotwang and Freder.
A scene which, I might add, clearly influenced Alfred Hitchcock in Blackmail. The source explicitly points this out. The DNA of this film is in everything. Think about the mechanics of that scene, the vertigo, the steep angles, the psychological terror of falling from a holy place. Hitchcock watched that and realized you could use architecture to induce anxiety.
I will concede the Hitchcock influence. Of course, Hitchcock looked at the geometry of a cathedral roof fight and stole it. He was a magpie. He stole from the best visual moments of the era. But the journey to get to that cathedral roof in Metropolis is incredibly tedious. The source material itself says the scenes are too long, provincially sentimental, and logically absurd. It is a giant. As far as execution is concerned, yes, but certainly not an artistic giant when it comes to narrative.
You are so obsessed with narrative logic. You want a spreadsheet, not a film. You want everything to tie up neatly like a quarterly earnings report.
I want a story where cause and effect actually exist,
Right.
where a CEO doesn't purposefully destroy his own city to make a point.
But the script is just the scaffolding. The script might be messy. I will grant you that Thea von Harbu's plotting is, well, labyrinthine. But the true language of Metropolis isn't the plot. It isn't the dialogue written on the inner titles. The true language is the imagery. The visual power of this film completely overwhelms the narrative content. It bypasses the logical brain entirely and hits you straight in the subconscious. That becomes the film's salvation.
Oh, so we just ignore the terrible writing because the pictures are pretty. That's your grand defense. You can't be serious.
They are pretty, they are staggering. We are talking about visual sequences that have literally never been surpassed in 100 years. Let's break down the mechanics of the visuals. Think about the transformation scene. The magic transformation of the metallic Art Deco statue into the flesh and blood female robot Maria.
It's a lot of glowing rings, mate.
It is a alchemical nightmare captured on film. They used actual physical elements, boiling liquids, double exposures, to make you believe a machine was taking on human flesh. Brigitte Helm's performance in that dual role, playing the saintly Maria and the twitching, hypersexualized robot, is incredible. And the sets, the gigantic sets that terrorize the viewer with their brutal strength. This was Lang drawing directly on his visit to New York. He stood on the deck of a ship, saw the skyline of Manhattan at night, and translated that overwhelming, crushing scale into sophisticated, menacing metropolitan spaces. He realized the city itself could be a monster.
You're praising the sets. You're praising the architecture.
Yes, because he uses the architecture as a character. He composes the frames brilliantly. It's not just big buildings for the sake of it. And it's not just the buildings, it's the people within them. Look at his background with Max Reinhardt's theater.
For those listening who aren't theater historians, Max Reinhardt was known for directing massive, spectacular stage productions with huge crowds.
Exactly. And Lang takes that theater technique and perfectly adapts it to film. He uses hundreds of human extras, not as individuals, but as moving geometric patterns. Think of the mechanism of that. He creates this fascinating dynamic rhythm with the crowd scenes. The workers marching to the elevators, their heads down, their steps completely synchronized. It's a visual manifestation of their lack of freedom. He exploits the magic of patches of light, using lighting as almost a complete substitute for sound. You don't need to hear the machines clanking. You can see the brutal, crushing weight of them and the sharp geometric shadows of the frame.
Hold on a second. Stop right there. You just said it yourself. I want you to hear what you just said. You're praising the geometry. You're praising the moving geometric patterns. What about the actual human beings?
What do you mean? They are part of the composition.
That is exactly the fatal flaw. Lang ignores the actors. He treats them like props. He treats them like architectural features. Imagine being an actor on that set, right? The director doesn't care about your internal motivation. He doesn't care about your facial expression. He just tells you to stand in a triangle formation with 50 other blokes purely so his wide shot looks like a massive cog. It's completely dehumanizing. Look at the source text. Lang does not pay enough attention to the main actors. Their performances aren't even expressionist. They are downright hysterical.
They had to be hysterical.
No, they didn't. They're flailing around, clutching their heads, rolling their eyes, because the director only cares about the walls. You have this massive catalog of crimes in Lang's direction outlined in the book. A leaning toward stagnant formalism, cruel and mechanistic imagery, absolute pomposity, and a monotonous symmetry that completely drains the humanity from the screen. He was so obsessed with the brutalist sets, so obsessed with making sure the skyscrapers looked menacing, that he completely forgot to direct the human soul.
You are missing the entire point of the expressionist movement. We need to define this for the listener because you're using formalism as a dirty word. Expressionism isn't about naturalism. It's not about subtle, realistic acting. The whole point of the movement, which was fading by 1927 but is still very vivid here, is to externalize internal psychological states. It's not ornamental. The actors had to be hysterical. Let's think about the mechanics of the set. If you are acting opposite a set that is 100 feet tall and looks like a mechanized Moloch ready to eat you alive, which literally happens in a vision sequence, machine turns into a god-eating workers, you cannot give a subtle, understated performance.
You can act like a recognizable human being.
If you try to act like a normal person next to a 100-foot roaring furnace, you would vanish. You would be swallowed by the set. Human body has to contort, to scream, to fling itself around just to register on the same visual wavelength as the architecture. The lack of proportion is actually what makes the film a lasting work of expressive power. Lang is rising above his faults by leaning into the absolute madness of the scale. It's not a documentary, it's an opera.
It is style over substance. Pure, unadulterated style over substance. You call it expressive power, I call it a megalomaniac playing with very expensive toy trains while his actors have nervous breakdowns on camera. But fine, let's say you're right about the visuals. Let's concede that the brutalist style and the hysterical acting perfectly match the overwhelming, oppressive nature of the city. That brings us to an even bigger problem. The most disturbing aspect of the entire film isn't the astronomical budget, and it isn't the eye-rolling overacting, it's the actual philosophical message it's pushing at the very end.
The message is a classic, enduring tale of unity. It's about bridging the gap.
The message is an ideological nightmare. Let's lay out the ending for the listener, because we've talked about the chaos. The massive flood happens, the underground city is ruined, the robot Maria is burned at the stake by the angry mob, the cathedral fight finishes with Rotwang falling to his death. And how does this massive, structurally complex saga of brutal class warfare, of slaves living in squalor while the rich play in gardens, how does it resolve? With a symbolic reconciliation between capital, represented by the CEO Joe Fredersen, and labor, represented by the foreman of the workers. And how are they reconciled? Do they form a union? Do they redistribute the wealth? No, through a handshake. Facilitated by love, represented by the CEO's son Freder and the real Maria. The final title card literally reads, "The mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart."
Exactly. It's a beautiful, abstract optimism. It's pathos. It strikes a chord.
It is abortive. It is inhuman. And it is utterly terrifying if you think about the historical context for more than 5 seconds.
Terrifying. It's message of peace. It's about finding common ground.
It is a fairy tale that paints a picture of Teutonic nationalism that is deeply, deeply unsettling. And look, we have to be very careful here. We are impartially reporting on the historical reception of this film. We aren't taking sides on 1920s politics. But we have to state the cold, hard facts as outlined in our source text. The Nazi leaders of the Third Reich, specifically Goebbels and Hitler, cherished Metropolis. They viewed it as a masterpiece of nationalist cinema. They absolutely loved it.
Because they entirely misinterpreted it for their own ends.
Did they? Let's look at the mechanics of the message. Why did they love it? Because the film preaches that the workers shouldn't actually change the system. They shouldn't strike. They shouldn't revolt. They shouldn't demand actual political power. They should just suffer patiently and wait for a magical mediator, a savior from the elite class to come down and hold their hand. It reinforces the hierarchy. It says the head is still the head, the hands are still the hands. You just need a nice feeling in the middle to make the exploitation palatable.
You are weaponizing the brutal hindsight of history against a piece of art. You are looking at a film made in 1927 and judging it by what happened in 1933.
I am using the critique of Heinrich Böll, one of the foremost post-Second World War German writers, a Nobel Prize winner. Böll looked at the ending of Metropolis and said it perfectly embodies what he called the German curse.
The German curse.
Yeah.
It's not the harsh, sweeping phrase.
But we need to unpack what he means by it, because it is the key to the whole film. What is the societal mechanism of this curse? He means a complete, almost infantile inability to understand what kind of social or political change is realistically achievable. Think about Weimar Germany in the 1920s. A nation utterly devastated by World War I, traumatized, economically ruined by hyperinflation, politically fractured. Instead of doing the hard, tedious, unglamorous work of building a functional democratic system from the ground up, what does the culture dream of? The film reflects this perfectly. It dreams of a finale where reconciliation happens without any apparent logical reason. Capital and labor shake hands. It's a magic wand waved over systemic oppression. It says to the traumatized populace, don't worry about the fact that you live in a subterranean hellscape. Don't worry about the broken economy. Just shake hands with the CEO and let love conquer all. It is politically juvenile, it offers a false catharsis, and historically, it proved extremely dangerous.
Okay, I hear you, but let's look at Fritz Lang's own defense of this. Because we have to remember the division of labor here. He didn't write that ending in a vacuum, Thea von Harbou did. She was deeply invested in that kind of mystical nationalism. Lang later claimed, and this is well documented in the text, that he was so swept up in the mechanics of the production, so obsessed with the chance to make an extraordinary visual picture, that he just closed his mind to the ambiguous, dodgy message. He just wanted to make the city look incredible. He wasn't trying to write a political manifesto. He was trying to push the boundaries of cinema.
You can't be serious. I was too busy looking at the lighting to notice I was endorsing a terrifying totalitarian fairy tale. That is the defense of an absolute coward. A director is completely, 100% responsible for the politics of their spectacle. You cannot build a multi-million-dollar monument to class struggle, command thousands of extras, invent new cinematic techniques to show the crushing weight of capitalism, and then shrug and say, oops, I wasn't really paying attention to the ending. I just liked the shiny buildings. That is exactly what makes him an arrogant git. He was playing with political dynamite because it looked good on camera.
That is so relentlessly cynical. You're analyzing it like a political science paper, but you're forgetting how audiences actually experience movies. The reason audiences still connect with it today, the reason the final account of the film's tone in our source is generally described as benevolent, is because that abstract optimism works. That sheer pathos of the story, the emotional crescendo, it actually bypasses the logic and hits the heart. Yes, we know the philosophy is flawed. You and I, sitting in a pub, know a handshake doesn't solve income inequality. But emotionally, in the dark of a theater, as a piece of cinematic music, the conciliatory finale is acceptable to the audience because of the sheer visual and emotional power with which it is told. We desperately want to believe in the heart mediating between the head and the hands. It appeals to our best nature, even if it's naive.
We want to believe in simple solutions to incredibly complex problems, which is exactly why the film is a warning, not a blueprint. It shows how easily you can be seduced by spectacle into accepting absolute rubbish.
If it is such a flawed, dangerous, bloated, logically bankrupt mess, if it's just a shiny object distracting us from a toxic message, then answer me this. Explain this mechanism to me. Why won't it die? Why are we sitting here a century later still arguing about it? Why are people still obsessing over it? Why are there so many resurrections of this exact film?
Because it's a massive, shiny object, and people are easily distracted by scale. If you build something big enough, people will stare at it, even if it's falling apart.
No, it's because it's a fractured masterpiece that history keeps desperately trying to fix. Let's look at the actual physical history of the film reels, the history of the cuts. It was so difficult to distribute initially because of its colossal length and the studio's panic over the budget that various shorter versions were released almost immediately just to recoup the desperate costs. The film was literally butchered. Entire subplots were hacked out with scissors. The world didn't even see Lang's full vision.
Yes, and let's talk about how it was saved by subsequent generations, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's talk about 1984.
Giorgio Moroder.
Exactly. The famous music producer Giorgio Moroder gets his hands on it in 1984. And what does he do? Does he treat it like a sacred artifact? He chops it down to an 83-minute version. He unceremoniously revises the editing rhythms. He tints the film. And he slaps a driving synth-rock music soundtrack all over it. Pat Benatar, Freddie Mercury. Now you tell me, if this film is, as you say, properly genius, if it is the absolute pinnacle of visual storytelling that stands on its own merits, why on earth does it need a 1980s rock soundtrack and a massive edit to be watchable for a modern audience?
That is incredibly unfair context.
It's the truth. They had to turn it into an MTV music video just to trick the 80s generation into sitting through a silent film.
The Moroder version was a product of its time. You have to understand the mechanism of film revival. Silent films were completely dead to the mainstream public in the early 80s. They were seen as boring, dusty museum pieces. Moroder realized that the visual rhythm of Metropolis perfectly matched the tempo of modern pop music. And the text specifically notes that the massive pop culture popularity of Moroder's version actually heralded a massive revival of interest in silent cinema with music. It was a gateway drug. It got an entire generation looking at the past again. It proved the visuals were timeless. But that's not even the real resurrection. If you want to talk about the true lasting power of this film, we have to talk about 2008.
The Argentina discovery. The holy grail of film nerds.
The absolute miracle in Buenos Aires. Listen to the mechanics of this because it is staggering. Paula Felix Didier, a newly appointed curator at the Museo del Cine in Buenos Aires, is digging around in the archives. She is literally looking through old cans of film. And what does she find? A highly damaged 16mm duplicate negative. Nitrate degradation is everywhere. But on this negative, she discovers 20 to 25 minutes of missing footage. Key scenes that had been cut from the picture by panicked studio executives and unseen by the public since May 1927 in Berlin.
And let me guess, you think those 25 minutes of scratched up, degraded footage suddenly turn a melodramatic mess into a flawless work of Shakespeare?
They fundamentally alter the entire film. They flesh out the secondary characters. Characters like the Thin Man, Frederson's sinister spy, suddenly have actual motivations and a complete character arc. The character of Josephat, who gets fired and becomes an ally, his subplot is restored. For the first time in 80 years, the actual vicissitudes of the story, the connective narrative tissue, makes sense. The thin, illogical version of the film that everyone, including critics for decades, had been attacking, wasn't even Lang's true vision. It was the butchered studio cut. This discovery proves that the film is an absolute titan of cinema history. Think about it. We are literally, physically digging through the earth, unearthing lost, degrading reels in Argentina, painstakingly restoring them frame by frame just to piece this masterpiece back together. If that sheer human effort doesn't prove its lasting, monumental value, nothing will.
It proves that film preservation is a noble, fascinating, and difficult science. I will absolutely grant you that unearthing lost footage is a massive historical achievement. But it does not prove that the restored footage makes the underlying philosophy of the film any less absurd. You can add 20 minutes back to a structurally unsound building, it's still going to fall over when wind blows. It just falls over with slightly more character development for the bloke in the lobby. The ending is still the ending. The German curse is still there.
You are hopelessly cynical. You look at the greatest, most ambitious monument of early cinema, a film that literally invented the visual vocabulary we still use today, and all you can see are the cracks in the masonry. I see a director who aimed higher than anyone before or since, a director brilliantly rising above his own faults and the limitations of his era to create the definitive blueprint for all science fiction cinema. Every dystopian city you see, every gleaming robot, every mad scientist in a laboratory, every massive skyscraper designed to make a human look like an ant, they all owe rent to Fritz Lang and Metropolis.
And you are hopelessly romantic. Yeah. You look at a bloated, financially ruinous, logically bankrupt warning about human hubris, a film that accidentally thrilled one of the most dangerous political regimes in history because of its naive, pacifying message, and you call it a triumph simply because the lighting was dynamic. It is the ultimate example of the German curse we talked about, right? An empty, colossal spectacle that completely dazzles the eye while slowly rotting the brain.
Well, we are clearly never going to agree on this. Not tonight, not ever.
Yeah.
But you know what? We don't have to. Because you sitting there listening to this right now, you don't have to take my word for it, and you certainly shouldn't take his cynical word for it. If you are tired of being spoon-fed, polite, sterile, algorithm-generated opinions about film history, if you want to know what actually happened in the trenches of 1920 cinema when people were literally risking bankruptcy for a single shot, then get the bloody book.
Indeed. It's Cinema, the Magic Vehicle, Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
Get the book. Look at the credits. Read the historical context we just debated. Unpack the mechanics of the Weimar film industry for yourself and see the historical grit firsthand. Do you actually have the spine for the real history of how your favorite movies were born? Or are you just going to keep mindlessly watching the remakes?
And before you do that, before you go back to your streaming queues and turn your brain off for the night, I want to leave you with one final thought to take down to the pub. My colleague here thinks Metropolis is a relic of the past. A unique, unrepeatable explosion of ambition. But you have to wonder. When we sit in the dark today, paying 20 quid to watch our modern, CGI-soaked $200 million blockbusters, the ones with the gorgeous digital visuals, the massive frictionless city destruction, and the incredibly stupid, simplistic plots about good and evil resolving with a punch or a handshake, are we actually seeing anything new? Or are we just watching the exact same beautiful, empty, logically absurd German curse playing out all over again, just in higher definition? Think about that next time you buy a ticket.